So how's that for volume level? Everybody okay? I talk a little louder than Carl does, so maybe that'll work. I never know how he's going to introduce me, which has become sort of an interesting thing. I don't know what he's going to say I've done in the past. Some of that was true. I'm not sure all of it was, but some of it was true. The title up on the board is "Good Enough is No Longer Good Enough" is not meant as a criticism to anybody, but what is past has passed, regardless of what Faulkner said, for most of our economic futures. The report we're doing for the foundation is entitled "Understanding and Using Change to Chart a Different Future," and most of the report we've done and most of the work we've done is on what is that change. You'll hear me talk a little bit later about all the other reports that have been prescriptive about what the region ought to do and things they ought to fund and all that. And we've got a few suggestions at the end, but most of this was trying to see around the corner. So we did a preview for some of the board members a couple weeks ago. One of the issues that we heard was, tell us more about what we should do. And I'm not here to tell anybody what they should do. It's your community, but we're going to give you some ideas of how to put what's happening in a little bit of context for you. So we're reviewing the existing economic development plans, and plans here mean plans for the foundation. We didn't look at everybody's individual plans in their organization and then look at that trends analysis. So I am from Dallas, North Carolina. My favorite philosopher is Mike Tyson. I know. If anybody know where Dallas, North Carolina is? Just a few of you, right? Okay, so we'll stay incognito for a little while. Mike Tyson was a great philosopher in that he's quotable. That's what it takes to be a great philosopher. If we think about the great philosophers of the past, we know their quotes. So the best quote, and he has a few good ones, but the best quote is that everybody has a plan till they get hit in the mouth. And it's a Mike Tyson idea that, it's easy to beat up somebody if until somebody hits you. I think we've all been hit, and I think we've all been hit pretty hard. Looking around the room, there's a lot of people sort of in my age bracket, and you'll hear me say today, I'm 57, and the world, if you'd asked me 25 years ago what it's going to look like today, I don't think I'd have got this. I'm not sure. I've got a watch that's 50 years old, but I doubt there's anybody in the room with a phone more than 2 or 3 years old. The world's just a different place. The punch is just change. It's the only thing that is absolutely true today is the acceleration of change that we're facing. And, I love the cartoon. Who wants change is everybody, and who wants to change is nobody, right? This is where we are in the world. There's nobody here who could sit back and honestly say they haven't experienced change in their workplace. But we have a hard time trying to figure out what it means to us. Now, don't get scared. Don't get scared. We didn't do this for the foundation. This is our model of how we help communities figure out what it is they ought to do. And there's a whole information stage, and down here in this one little corner where it says change is the part we did. When we look at communities, we say you got to figure out, what's your inertia in history, but where are you? What's the common current reality of where you are? And in context of that, it's competition. Economic development's a great field. You can be anything, but it's all about compared to your neighbors, compared to your competitors. And so you look at it in context, you look at it as what's valuable to your community, but you also look at it in terms of where the puck will be, if you like the old Gretzky line. So this is mostly about change. Once you do that, you can figure out your choice of where you want to be, and you can figure out how to do it. But just to keep in mind that this is a piece of that whole puzzle. So trends, and we'll spend most of the next 40 minutes on trends. We're going to look at them in 4 groups. We're going to look at economic business trends, workforce trends, technological trends, and then demographic and societal trends. And we just start with the economics up front. Today, the overriding trend in business, and especially in economic development, is competition. You are in competition every day for every job, for every person, for every dollar of investment, for every highway fund, start naming it. You are in competition. If you run a small business here and you're a small caterer, you're in competition with Food Lion. You know, if you're running a small shoe store in Danville, you're in competition with online shoe sales. Whoever thought online shoe sales would be really popular? But I've got kids in their 20s, and that's where they buy all their shoes. And you just keep going. So competition is the overriding trend that's impacting all of us. And we know what the major factors are that push economic development decisions these days. This is the latest review. Every year for the last 29 years, there's been a survey of consultants and CEOs, highway accessibility, some cost, the availability of land and buildings, labor, whether you're a right to work state, your proximity to other markets, your energy, it depends on the client. Every client's a little different, but we sort of know this, and you could sit here today and we could, in a different group with a different thing to do today, we'd let you give grades to this region on each one of those things. And my guess is you get some high scores and you get some low scores, and that's true of everywhere, right? There are very few places that have high scores on everything. If you're just wonderful at everything, well, then your cost factors are not going to be very good, right? So we know that. We also know that the quality of life factors that influence decisions start with crime rates, public schools, health, and housing. Those top four have been the top four in that order every year for 29 years. So when we say, what's the quality of life? When we go to a community, they say, we have a great quality of life. And it takes about 10 minutes to check your crime stats, your school stats, your housing costs, and your health outcomes. You can do that quantitatively in no time, and we just, that's how people determine those things. We know the economy's changed a great deal since most of us have been alive. We know that working class share of jobs, that's the blue line there, continue to drop. I'm sorry, it's the Carolina blue line there, continue to drop. We know that both the creative class sector and the service sector continue to rise. We've also known for a long time that manufacturing has changed a lot. Most of you, we tell people you can win bar bets today if you listen closely. And the first one is, how has the percentage of manufacturing GDP in America changed over the last 50 years? And the answer to that is not much. We talk all the time about losing manufacturing. But in fact, as a percentage of GDP, manufacturing stayed relatively the same. Our output's been roughly the same as GDP. What's changed is that we don't need near as many people to do manufacturing anymore. The types of things we manufacture has changed, but economically, manufacturing jobs have been dropping and they continue to drop. We've had a little bit of a rebound in the last couple of years because we lost 5 million jobs during the recession, so we've got about 600,000 of them back. But overall, the number of manufacturing jobs in America continues to drop. Not that manufacturing's amazingly important, and there will always be a need for manufacturing in communities. And in communities like Danville, it remains very important. But if you think that there's going to be a ton of new jobs spread out across the country, that's not going to happen in the long run. Another thing that's been true lately is that Virginia has been impacted pretty dramatically by sequestration cuts and other things. And if you look at the last year, Virginia's over there on the far side. Virginia's job growth, overall job growth, has not been great. This is overall jobs, this is manufacturing jobs by state. And so one of the takeaways, at least for the short term, is that you're probably not going to be buoyed by a big rising tide at the state level. And we know, and y'all know this, we don't have the data up today on it, but you know that where the jobs have been concentrating have not been evenly spread around any state in America. We look at all the counties in the South, and most of the job growth is concentrated in urban areas, and we'll talk about that. Let's see here. Urbanization is an overriding trend. It's a trend nationally, it's a trend internationally, more and more people in fewer and fewer places. That's sort of what you compete with every day, places that look like this. I mean, it would be nice to pretend that you don't have to compete against big cities, that you get to compete with places your size. It's not the nature of the world anymore. Most days you have to compete with who's ever there. The analogy is if your high school basketball team plays the cross-county team and you're better, you've got a really good chance of winning. But tomorrow, if you have to go play the Cleveland Cavaliers, it's a different model, right? or the Duke Blue Devils or somebody else. We don't get to choose who we compete with anymore, and urban areas are concentrating more and more of the things that businesses are looking at. It's a growth chart that show in America for the last group of years that show that the bigger the place, the faster the growth. So places of 1 million or more have been growing at a percentage rate faster than places of 500,000. And places of 500,000 have been growing faster than places of 250,000. And on down and on down. And though it doesn't show up here, these are all the urban areas. If you were in rural America, you'd have job losses. You'd have employment losses, population losses. I mean, it's a straight line, and that's the way it's been going. It's as true in Europe, it's true in South America, it's true in Asia, it's true everywhere. In America, we have a little over 3,000 counties. Half the population live in the blue ones on the board, 146 counties. And it's concentrating even more. So if you look forward, you're not going to see a world where we start distributing population broadly in the future. You're going to see much more concentrations, and this is even higher among younger people and even higher among college educated. So that becomes the trend that overrides the distribution of people. Business has also changed fairly dramatically. This is a chart showing where the job growth has been since the end of the recession. The blue one up in the corner, and the axis, the vertical axis is the wage of jobs, the horizontal axis is the number of jobs. So if you're up in the far corner, up in here, that's the great high-paying jobs that have been growing the fastest, and they're professional, scientific, and technical services. Those are the people with the big college degrees or the consultants running around. Lots of jobs, lots of people up in that corner. If you look at the job losses over here for high wage, it's state, local, and federal government all losing jobs, and also information, which is publishing and those type of things. It's not IT, it's not technology, it's information. If you look at manufacturing, we're doing better in durable goods, the high-end advanced materials, some growth there. We're holding our own in recent years. This is non-durable goods, the lower cost stuff. But what's happening that's overriding is this group down here in the corner. 3 little bubbles: administrative services, retail, trade, and food services. They're the fastest growing sectors in the economy. They average $11 an hour. And of our 151 million jobs in America, 49 million are in those 3 categories. Think about that for a minute. 49 million, and one out of every 3 workers in America works down there. And that's the fastest growing sector. And so we're running into a lot of low-wage jobs and a lot of people who are having to make, working 2 jobs, 2 income families, that type of work to get that done. And so you see that the dichotomy is spreading out pretty quickly. We can look at sector growth. Again, this is over a longer period of time, back to the 70s. Business and professional health and education services are the areas that have been growing at the high end, and then a whole group of service jobs at the low end. Really interesting, how many people in the room are in healthcare of some sort? So short term, you're going to add people, but most people that I know think that longer term, number of body counts and working in health might start shrinking once we get past the baby boom. The last few years has been the lowest, you can see down here, lowest growth in health expenditures in a long time, and you're seeing a lot more tightening in the healthcare sector. Sorry to say, most of the costs are people. And so as that tightening comes down, I would not expect hospitals and doctors' office and other things to be driving the economy in the future. A lot of other business trends around globalization. Everybody has a global supply chain if they don't have global customers. The rise of e-commerce is changing lots of things, changing retail completely. How many of you in the room have bought something online in the last 12 months? Raise your hand. So look around the room. Now, raise your hand if you've never bought anything online. Just a couple of you, right? That's okay. How old's your cell phone?
5 years old.
Oh my goodness. Oh, good. I'm not going to say another word. I was let that go. Think about small business impacts of having to operate 24/7, 365. I've got two 20-somethings. They don't expect anything to ever close. No, it's never closed, right? Well, what does that do to our small business community? Good news, local homegrown stuff, locally sourced, is a hot thing right now. That helps communities like this, where people want that more authentic local stuff. Consumer influence branding is another thing that can work in your favor, because if people today, if you look at the studies, why people do things, why people buy things, why people go places is determined by other people talking well about it. Numbers, 87% of people who go to a movie today have checked out what other people say about the movie before they go. Not the advertising, what other people are saying. When they go on vacation, almost everybody reads what other people say about a community. So if people say good things about your community, you have the ability to rise above your ability to advertise. The sharing economy is just at its very beginning, and right now I guess Uber's the poster child of that. But if you think about it, do your big economic dump for a second, everybody's car in this room is sitting idle. All your houses are mostly idle right now. I mean, most of our assets in the economy aren't being used. How do we use them on a daily basis? The reinvention of healthcare will change whether or not, only Duke Hospital or the Mayo Clinic are where you can get great service. You can get e-service health all over the place. And then as real estate starts to shift, because we don't want it sitting idle most of the day, or we don't want it doing other things, it has impacts on your local real estate communities. The job trends, the workforce trends, are probably even more profound. First, the bar is rising. To be successful at anything, the bar keeps going up. So if you hire today a high school grad, you expect that high school grad to have more skills than you did when we were graduating high school. You expect them to have a level that's higher. I know we can argue whether they do or not, but the expectation is if they don't, you're going to be upset. We know why we like people to have degrees. The higher your educational attainment level, the lower your unemployment rate, and the higher you're paid. What's happening? Anybody read the article yesterday that came out? High school seniors going to college dropped this year for the 5th straight year. We had topped 70% about 5 years ago. We're back down to 65% and moving down. Why it matters is the number of people with college education continues to be more employed. The people without a high school degree continue to be less employed. And so you end up with dependency economies across the country that are very different. Now, that doesn't mean every job needs a college degree, but it means if I have one and I'm competing for a job that doesn't need one, I'm probably going to get it. So the bar keeps rising, right? The separation, the combination of where the jobs are, the high pay, low paid, and the combination of college and not college has resulted in a real separating of where wages are. When I was growing up as a baby boomer, a college degree person averaged $41,000 a year, and someone who had high school averaged $32,000. That was the gap. Today that gap is up to $45,000. College degrees gone up a lot, high school degrees gone down. So the separation is wider and wider. And so what happens in our community is if we have a lot of people who don't graduate high school or just graduate high school, they're going to have very few options to make more money over the long haul. In fact, for almost everyone in that category, average wages continue to drop. The bar keeps going up because more and more people have attainment levels. Even though we like to talk about how many people don't have a high school degree, overall, by race, every race is continuing to move up in terms of degrees. These are high school or GED. Populations in our public schools have changed a little bit, and so that's part of the numbers game that you get into. But overall, every demographic we have, more education in high school, more education in college. So as the bar just keeps going up, some of you probably have a 15-year-old at home that you're going, God, I hope I can get them to, but the bar will continue to rise. Proficiency is a great thing. I didn't bring all the slides today we provided them on where Virginia ranks or where y'all rank. But today we celebrate, and I want you to look, Virginia has the highest 8th grade proficiency in math among all the southern states. It's 40%. let that one sink in for a minute. This is one of the things that, we have communities in my home state of North Carolina, 37%. We're right near the top, yay. Proficiency, 37%. Now, we can argue all day about whether the bar should be there, but in the last few weeks, we've decided we're not going to do end-of-grade testing in Texas and Florida, and we're going to cut them out all over the country because we don't like to hear what the final results are. It does take away time. I buy all that argument, but what's going to happen in the near term is businesses aren't going to care about any of those degrees. They're just going to test you. They already do it, many of them, but that's going to become the norm at some point where degrees won't, sorry for all the higher education people in the room, but if you're a prestigious university where your degree means something in the marketplace, then okay. But if you're not, then you're just going to test. Right now, if you want to get a job at Target, even if you have a high school degree, they test to see if you can read and write. You do that too, by the way. Most of you in the room test writing skills for college degree people. Well, that's where we're headed for, is that proficiency done the way it is. We want all the skills. This is last year's numbers on what are the most important skills. Teamwork, problem solving, organization, verbal communication. Any philosophy majors in the room? Sounds like a great idea, right? Philosophy major. But then you get to the bottom of that top 10 list. It's top 10 of a whole lot of things, and it's quantitative data and technological proficiency. And we want it all, so the bar goes up. We did a study for Durham, North Carolina, and went out and we thought we'd be really smart testing what type of skills were important. We went out and interviewed 125 or so businesses and said, rank these skill sets for us, and we want you to rank them by jobs that you pay under $12 an hour, or jobs you pay 12 to 20, and jobs over 20, thinking they'd all be different, right? You need different skills for different levels. Well, we learned a good lesson, which is that no. What businesses care about are honesty and integrity, dependability, and attitude and energy, work ethic, and they're the same no matter who you're hiring. What's fascinating, what we heard in the one-on-one interviews is that employers can tell within 60 seconds when you walk in the room whether they're not going to hire you. They don't know if they're going to hire you yet, but within 60 seconds they've written off everybody because of the way their energy, the way they carry themselves, their attitudes as they walk in a room. Well, think about that and how you design curriculum. Very strange, right? Skills fall into three categories, and this is a lot of people define them different ways, but for us, we have to have different strategies going forward. For job skills, which perfect community college work, perfect, give someone a very specific skill, and they can learn it. A lot of businesses teach that themselves. Work skills that everybody's expected to have: communication, problem solving, critical thinking, and then all of those crazy life skills or soft skills or whatever you like calling them. We call them skills your mother should have taught you. Honesty, dependability. Somewhere, every one of you just had a flash to hiring in your own businesses, and life skills have prevented you from hiring a lot of people. And those life skills also come up with barriers, right? This is the drug test, the criminal record, all those insurmountable barriers. There's some percentage of our current population in America, and there's not been a good study done, that can't get past that hurdle. And the guesses I hear are somewhere in the 15 to 20% range. If 15 to 20% of our workforce can't get past the life skills or the barrier hurdle, then we've got a real issue, and no amount of jobs fix that. That's what we found in some of our work, is that we have 50 jobs, but if you have an insurmountable barrier, you're not going to get any of them. Business won't hire anybody before they hire you. And so how we address those issues is community by community. There's no magic wand. Education and work skills are changing dramatically with digital gaming for competency, with MOOCs, for virtual high schools. We're starting to see around the country people able to go to high school online. And then I think our generation probably 20 years ago, 25 years ago, started with the idea of lifelong learning. Remember that? Well, now, honest to goodness, it's lifelong learning. If you're in your 30s in this room and you think you have enough skills to make it for the next 20 years, not going to happen. So communities that can reskill adults are going to have a huge competitive advantage. Think about that. I mean, right now, we're not set up very well for reskilling adults. It's just not our national way of doing business. But communities that are starting to focus on that have a competitive advantage. The other issue, and one that we hammered hard to the board, was this idea of fragment and careers, this, the idea that everybody all of a sudden is in some sort of contingent work status. And probably not in this room, but overall, we're looking at about a third of the population now that work for themselves and you in some temporary fashion, whether it's contingent or gig or whatever you want to call it. Those are freelancers, and that's the word I'm going to use for them. Freelancers are freelance. They can live anywhere. They tend to live places where there's a good quality of life, a low cost of living, and they bring their wealth and their money. So if I'm a freelance consultant and I'm doing work for the state of Kentucky and I live in Danville, then all of a sudden I'm a traded cluster. I'm bringing money from outside your area in, and that makes me a pretty good target. What I need is to be within an hour or so of an airport. I need a relatively low cost of living. I need broadband bad. I need some of the amenities, outdoor stuff. It's a place where micropolitan regions like Danville are starting to see an ability to move forward. Other trends that y'all are noticing is multi-generational workplaces. Adults, especially older adults, are retiring much later in life. There's a slowing of the prime labor age. We're not having as many children, you'll see that in a minute. And then this lifelong learning. The technological trends are probably the ones we see in our face every day, more than anything else. We see overall that our world is being changed. So whether that's energy, remember that we're 5.5 years from woe is me energy issues. How in the world were we ever going to be not dependent on the Middle East for all of our energy needs? And 5 years later, through technological shifts, we're an energy net exporter. The world just shifted, and then if you're big into alternative energy, you could see this changing again. Solar energy costs right now, solar and wind and bio, they're still a small fraction, very small fraction of energy, but the price numbers keep dramatically dropping. How many people here have an electric or a hybrid car in the room? So 3, 4. I'll take a bet that 10 years from now, it'll be more than a third of the room, and 20 years from now, it'll be more than half the room, and 40 years from now, it'll be everybody. We'll just see that shift. Mobile internet changes the way we do. How many of you, when you didn't need your GPS today, how many of you came from out of town and used your GPS today? I mean, GPSs are really new. Advanced materials allow us not to have big iron works in the South. We can compete for automotive and aerospace, and genomics change everything. There's a double-edged sword. This is the economist idea, that the probability that your job will be taken by a robot. How many accountants in the room? Almost certain. When you bring a group together, we did this with 100 CEOs in Kentucky in every field and said, will there be more lawyers or less lawyers? Less. Will there be more doctors or less doctors? Less. Will there be more programmers or less programmers? Less. Software and robotics start changing that. And for me, at least, economists are somewhere in the 50-50 range. So I only have to outrun one person, I think. I'm going to make sure they're slow. This is what manufacturing looks like in the future. That's an actual car being made right now. You don't see any people. It's what waitstaff look like in the future. That's what home health aides look like in the future. Distributing pills, by the way, which I think is fascinating. That's a taxi driver, right? There's nobody there. This is Walmart's prototype logistics. It's a truck that self-drives itself from Long Beach to all the Walmart stores in the Midwest. There's a robot in the back of this thing that unloads off the containers off the ship, puts them in the truck, and then self-drives itself around and unloads it. Those technological trends, some of them are scary, other ones not so much for you guys. Think about entertainment right now. It used to be, growing up in Dallas, North Carolina, that we had a 35-minute drive to go see a movie. Today, entertainment, you can watch anything, on your cell phone or your 100-inch TV, and entertainment has become remote. You don't have to go anywhere these days, and we can all argue whether we think that's a good thing or a bad thing. We're talking about outdoor concerts at our breakfast table, and I don't think that's that's not the substitute for Bonnaroo. But if you think about young people's entertainment choices today, all of a sudden, Danville doesn't look like it's a long way from anywhere. It looks like that as long as you've got a portal, you're pretty close. Electronic medicine the same way. Specialists today, robotic surgery, all change, distance is dying. Crowd capitalization, we've had times, I'm sure there's bankers in the room, but over the last few years, what we've seen in more micropolitan regions is banking decisions being pushed to urban areas. Well, maybe you, through crowdsourcing now and common capital, you can find ways to redo them locally. Application globalization is probably the key. Used to be, not 10 years ago, that things would roll out in the big city and 3 years later, 4 years later, you'd get to a smaller place. Today, they roll out at the same place all the time. Distance has died. And then education gamification. People are going to be able to get any education they want sitting any place in Danville any day of the week, any hour of the day. The demographic shifts in America, some of them are, by the way, if you want to predict the future, this is the one you should do, because demography is easy. Next year, you're all 1 year older than you are today. Yeah. We've seen for a long time that America has been browning. And we talk about it, but we've been talking about it for 20 years because we could see it coming. We're in a world where we're not too far in America from being a minority, plural society, and that's continuing to happen. It will be places that are welcoming and have diversity will be much stronger than places that aren't. This is a map showing if you're some color on this map, it means that you have a higher concentration of a specific minority. So the red happen to be African Americans, and you can see that in the South we have always had high concentrations of African Americans. In the West, higher concentrations of Hispanics. Around the Northeast and the upper Midwest, you can see still very much European background, white European background. And so I think that we have an advantage in the South. We're used to a multicultural world. We have histories we need to overcome, but still we're used to it, and we ought to be able to take advantage of it. Women going to work more than men. Probably a whole discussion someday for this group, but the idea today is working age men are working at the lowest rate they have in recent history. Working age women have leveled off. They're actually slightly lower than they were 10 years ago, but they've leveled off in the mid-60s. Men are in the mid-60s percentage-wise now too. But we are not going back to a society where you have paternalistic male figure providing the money for most of the family. That's not the way our families are set up. And if our institutions believe that's the way they're set up, then they've missed a lot of the data. Marriage rates are dropping dramatically. Think about this. Today, among adults 18 years or older, among whites, only 55% are married. Among African Americans, only 31% are married. Marriage is just not the norm that it used to be. And when you look at young people, age 18 to 32, only 1 in 4 millennials is actually married. At that same age, us boomers, half were married. So marriage is different today, and that will change retail trade, it'll change how workplaces are, it'll change childrearing. The billion shades of gray, there's a few people in the room who probably understand this as well as I do. We're getting older as a society, and what it means in the long run is that we're going to be looking for alternatives as we retire. This slide shows the retirement savings of Americans. And today, among 55 to 64-year-olds, just at 10% have 4 years of saving. Everybody else less. So you're going to be talking about an older generation that will either work much longer, have to retire to a lower cost place, or hope that their parents leave them a lot of money. Those are the choices. So places that are lower cost are going to be arbitraged by everybody as they move forward for gray people. Societal, the change, as I told you, in the family today, two married parents having children, that family structure is less than half. We talk all the time. How many millennials in the room? Not a lot of you, but raise your hand. Don't be shy. Y'all aren't supposed to be shy, by the way. That's not one of your trends. Think about it. So all of you who just went, oh God, millennials. We do these focus groups. We know y'all do that. Think about it. 75% of the workforce in 10 years will be millennials. They are rewriting our workplace. 82% of the growth in America between now and 2050 will be foreign born. If you're not globally engaged and globally aware, your community is not going to be able to move forward. We've got an issue with higher ed today. If your parents are in the top income quartile, 3 or 4 of your children will end up with a college degree. If your parents are in the bottom quartile, only 1 in 10. We've gotten to a place again where young people don't have the mobility. You saw the numbers. Our mobility in America has shrunk dramatically, and so we're going to have a lot of pressure of people at the bottom half of the income bracket saying, wait, I need to move forward. How do we look at college cost? How do we look at opportunities? And just fewer children overall. A lot fewer children as we move forward. That'll impact school systems, it'll impact everything. Today, 2.1 is replacement rate. If a woman doesn't have 2.1 children, because some die before adulthood, then they're not even replacing their family, and the average stays 1.9 in America. So without immigration, if we stop today, just no more immigrants stop, we'd start shrinking, like Japan, like Europe. We'd be in a shrinking society. We looked at a little bit at Danville's current reality, and I'm not going to go into much of this today other than to say that a couple of the facts that bothered us the most. One is the loss of 25 to 44-year-olds. That young working class, you can see the Danville region between 2000 and 2010 lost 20%. Young people were leaving, and that's a key thing that has to be turned around. If you look at some other cities who had big manufacturing losses, similar size, you can see that even among those kind of peer communities, Danville had a huge drop there. That's a key thing for you to focus on as you go forward, is how do you keep the 22 to 44-year-olds? The other thing is that your wage levels are lower than your peers, and they're lower than the state and other things, both in good producing and service producing. So how do you get the wages up is going to be a key as you move forward. Some better, higher paying jobs. Some of that will have to do with the types of jobs that come into the community, but also just moving up the value chain on some of them. We spent a lot of time talking to people in Danville. We looked at selected leader groups, the Future of the Piedmont, Middle Border Forward, and the Young Professionals group, and asked them a lot about the community. So we didn't talk to every leader, we talked to elected official groups, that kind of thing. But when we talked, we had some themes. Attitude in the community, lack of vision, lack of leadership, race issues, communication overall, the economy, and education training were the themes, and some of the takeaways were that there was not an articulate vision for the future. No, there's a whole lot of psychological stuff we could spend time talking about the psychology of uncertainty. There is real clear evidence that if you don't have any idea where you're going, you're going to be scared to death of it. Without a vision of where you're headed, the most immediate reaction is fear. It breeds a lot of behavioral issues at the extreme end. So setting a vision for the community, a lot of people said is a very important first step. The lack of leadership is a barrier to improvement. Everybody in this room is a leader sometime. So that's not an insult to leaders. What it is that we want leaders because we want them to do something to help us. So this idea of setting this vision, articulating the vision, is a key. The lack of inclusion of young people, especially young professionals and minorities in decision making. And people talked about race as still an issue that is under the surface, but not always under the surface locally, that needs to be talked about more, and solutions need to be found. When they talked about the economy, it was actually more positive than I was expecting. The River District investments being growing and successful give people a sense of hope. Entrepreneurs growing in the community was a huge issue for people. They could see those green shoots in the economy in the form of freelancers and entrepreneurs. How you nurture that's a key to your future. And I can tell you, take anything away from an economic development standpoint, it's that group that's the future. Your broadband infrastructure, your low cost of living, the agricultural nature that's still important. Everybody talks about your great natural beauty and your ability to attract people. A lot of pride in public art. And everybody talks about the river too. They also talk about the fact that there are very few mid-level jobs. You've got a lot of jobs at the low end, some jobs at the high end. By the way, you saw America, that's what it looks like. But people are concerned about that, the loss of young people. The fact that you're pretty geographically spread out, this is something a lot of communities have from a physical standpoint, and that you still have a lot of vacant space. Everybody, the only thing that everybody agreed on is that everybody in the community needs to focus on raising the skill and education level of the citizens here. That was overwhelmingly the key area that people had no disagreement about. So you might say, well, Ted, why don't you just tell us what we should do? I think it's silly for you to ask me that, but some people do. And so what I would say is the first thing you should do is read all the reports that have already been done telling you what to do. They stand about 3 feet high in my office. And there's a bunch of them up here. By the way, they almost all say the same thing. They all say that you need to shed the old manufacturing image. That doesn't mean you don't value manufacturing. You should. But shed the image, work on a new image. Sorry, spring. I know, I'm from North Carolina. It's that time of year. The oak trees have just started. You have to keep investing in creating a better place to live and work. Urban community, downtown, that kind of thing. The revitalization downtown is a symbol for the community. It's also what attracts younger professionals. Need to keep working on it. The skill attainment level has to be raised. Entrepreneurial activity needs to be supported, needs to be a priority. Whatever you do, there needs to be a regional approach. Work sheds are regional, quality of life sheds are regional, cost sheds are regional. And it's not because I worked most of my life in regional organizations, I've worked local too, but unless you have a regional approach, it isn't going to work. It also has to be a collaborative approach. You can't be regional unless you're on the same page. So we'll talk about collaboration in a minute. And then leadership here needs to be diversified, and there has to be some support for that leadership. We came up with 3 additional recommendations we'll throw on the table to finish this. One is that you need an infrastructure to excite, inform, engage, and diversify leadership. I know the foundation, and we're talking now to the foundation mostly. Foundation has put money in leadership, support, leadership, growth. Most communities have. Double it, triple it, quadruple it. You need a more consistent, formal, and informal way to anticipate the future. Leaders need to be informed. Leadership is not getting together and having dinner and talking about what's bad. You've got to begin to formalize a multi-year effort to incorporate future thinking, talking about the past. And again, Dallas, North Carolina, all 4 of my grandparents were textile workers. I know what talking about the past is like. I'm old enough now that that's what I talk about mostly too. It's not what young people want to talk about. It's not what young professionals, they want to see where the future's headed. We suggested positioning this as one of the key places in America to start looking at how micropolitans are reinventing themselves. There's not a lot of work that's been done on this. And you guys probably have the resources and as many ideas as anybody. Let's position Danville as the epicenter of micropolitan discussions in America for the future. We need to work on younger leaders in the community. And we think a specific program that matches older and younger, white and minority, and urban city leaders and county leaders, specifically matching them up is a way to start breaking down some of the barriers. And then we want to position DRF as the information source. I didn't tell anybody what to do, but if you need to find information, they're the place. Leadership is one of those, why in the world do we want leaders? And I get asked that question a lot. I last week did both Leadership North Carolina class, Leadership South Carolina class. We're Americans, we don't like leadership. We're cowboys. We don't want leaders to be appointed for no particular reason, right? We want leaders that is someone we trust to make sense of all of this change and noise. We want to trust somebody that they're looking out for us. And then we want leaders that do something to solve the problems we have. That's why we want leadership. So when we're talking about groups leaderships, we're not talking about them abstractly. We're talking about creating groups that are action oriented. We don't like strategic plans. We like strategic action agendas. What are we going to do? And how do we get leaders to represent the whole community as we move forward on that? You also need leaders to articulate the vision. Jack Welch had a great line that, leaders have to own that future. Somebody has to say it over and over. And I would submit to you that communities that are very successful have a story. They tell it. If you go to Chattanooga, everybody says the same thing. If you go to Research Triangle Park, everybody says the same thing. If you go to Austin, Texas, everybody says the same thing. There's a story. There's an articulated story that people created, then they chased it, and when they got it, they told everybody how wonderful they were doing it, right? There's got to be a new articulated story here. And collaboration's tough, I got it. It's working together, and I know all the jokes about it's an unnatural act between unconsenting adults. So if you forget everything else I say today, remember the collaboration thing I'm about to say, which is a commitment to collaboration is not a wedding. It's not married for life. It's not go home every night together. Collaboration, put your brain around a habitat house. Habitat house is you don't have to like the people you work with. You have to go do the part of your habitat house that you're supposed to do. And if you have an articulated vision in a community, each group knows what they're supposed to do. They don't have to like each other. They don't have to pal around together to get it done. They have to go do their piece. So Mayor, if the city has a piece of this they do, you don't have to like somebody over here. They might be a different party, for goodness sakes. But if you do your piece and they do their piece and y'all have agreed what you need for the region, then that's collaboration for me. Second is that new vision needs some structure. And I know that there are a variety of plans here, but we think that DRF ought to take the lead in funding regional visioning and strategy work. Somebody ought to go out and decide what the 10 or 15 things are, get all the multiple groups that are involved to agree to them, and just decide to do it for the next 5 years, 10 years. Not for the next 2 months and not to put on a shelf, but whatever that is. And you've got a million plans that you don't have to start over. You don't need to fund people to tell you all the research stuff. You've got all that. You need somebody to help you get the groups together. You can do it yourselves. Get the groups together, put a whiteboard up and agree what you're all going to work on. And then finally, there are some opportunities coming through this change. Buying local is something people like, and it helps. The demise of distance gives you a value proposition for young people that is really interesting. Retiree entrepreneurship is an area, you've got all sorts of people who are now retiring from other parts of the country at 50, and they're going to have second life businesses. How do you support those entrepreneurs and also the freelancers? Think about it. If you look today at the entrepreneurs that are here, most of them came from somewhere else and showed up here, and now they're happy, hunky-dory, working in space that's downtown, gives them interesting things, working in places around here. How do you put the idea of buffalo hunting, and I love recruitment. I've done it my whole life, right, Tom? How many have we chased together? But the odds are long. So, go deep sea fish some, but on your way in and on your way out, throw out the nets and get as many of the other things as possible so you can live on those as you're moving your way through. So in summary for me, doing what you used to do, no matter how well you do it, isn't going to work. The world changed too much for the old models. So if we just put out an ad in a business magazine and say, y'all come, we're cheap and good, nobody's going to listen. It doesn't work anymore. And I can tell you, out of the 5,000 communities in America, 4,500 of them are still trying that. And it's not working for much of anybody, right? There are trends working against you. It is easy to say, oh God, urbanization and all this stuff. Yeah, but technology trends, some of them are really working for you. Some of the globalization, there are things working for you. It's time to start seeing the good ones. The key is going to be that leadership, reinvent it. You've got some, leaders that have been around a while. Some of them, have been around a long time. Use them. Get things done. Use that leadership and use them to help build new leadership as you move forward, because you're going to need a whole new class sometime soon. And then building a place that can attract talent and money You've got to have multiple economic development strategies. One, it starts with education of your people. Without a skilled labor force, you can't win any of this. I mean, that's the first question on the first RFP you get is how many people with these skills do you have within a certain radius? Well, if your numbers are low, you've got a problem before you start. So you've got to deal with that. Long list of things that are also positive. Your infrastructure is really good from the standpoint of broadband and water and sewer and things like that. Your building's okay, land pretty good. I mean, there are things that are positives for you. But overall, if we came into the community as an investor and said, so what are you doing? Where's Danville? Where's Caswell County? Where's Pennsylvania County? Where y'all going for the next 10 years? What's going to be there? Then you got to be able to answer that question. As we look at trends as we go forward, we'll continue to work with the foundation to provide as many as possible. But I charge everybody, start trend spotting yourself. There are people all day long, and I have a dinner party sometime and predict the future with your friends. You don't have to predict the tangents. Nobody can predict, stock market crashes and all that stuff. What you can predict is what's been happening for a long time that's probably, you can predict faster, more technological. Those are things you can predict, use them for the future. The bottom line with all of this is, so what? What do you do once you know something? What do you do with plans that tell you to do something? And for the foundation, the answer is you invest in the things that are going to get you the furthest. And for us, that's leadership and it's workforce and it's being the collaborative capacity that helps the community set a vision and move forward. We think that's the key. I'm sorry, some days I wish it was more exciting. It isn't. You have some of the bones already here. You got to double down on them. So, Carl, I'll stop and answer questions, and thank you very much. Unless you have any.
No.
That's an unusual thing. He usually has quite a few.
All the slides you've seen will be on DRF's website, drfonline.org today. And an executive summary of Ted's presentation will be made available to you as you exit. And it will also be available online. So you'll have an opportunity to, I sat in the back of the room intentionally. I did not pass all of the eye tests, but when you have them on your individual screen or your iPad or whatever, you'll be able to look at them in much more detail. There are a group of foundations around the country, and we happen to be, the Dan River region, through the Workforce Collaborative, happens to be part of that network that are located in about 20 communities throughout the country. It was originally funded by Microsoft, Ford, some large national foundations, and it's increasingly shifted. So in this region, we have 5 or 6 different foundations that are all sharing money in a single pool for the Workforce Collaborative of the Dan River region. So that's one example. It's an area where individually each foundation, they're also making investments. So JT Mini Maud Foundation, I see Fred somewhere in the room, they've put a lot of resources into this. In the last 6 months, DRF has put over $5 million in workforce development specifically related to advanced manufacturing at DCC and here at the Institute. So there are a number of those types of pieces.
And so when we talk about workforce development, and we do a fair amount of work in the field, we tend to talk about workforce systems, and there aren't any systems. So I'll be the bearer of bad news. There aren't any systems. There's an early childhood system and a K-12 system and a community college system and a higher education system. There's an apprenticeship system. There's all sorts of systems. And when you're dealing with workforce, you're not really talking about one or the other. If a child doesn't have early childhood education or good teachers in the 2nd grade, by the time they get to be 18, workforce help is a whole lot different, harder, and more limited. So this is about a continuum of help. So when I talk about a workforce, I'm talking about education and skill training system. And I'm talking about it all the way till, you're retired, whatever that happens to be. So if it's entrepreneurial training for a freelancer who knows how to code but don't have any idea that they have to pay taxes because they don't have any business background, it's that training too. So it's this whole idea of life training, but it starts at a young age, it works up. There are communities, I think the Community Foundation in Boston has been really big on early childhood. The Community Foundation in the Valley in San Jose is really high on putting money into junior high, they don't call it, I think, middle school, but middle school, high school coding and other skills that are broader to get people into more analytics, STEM research. There's a bunch of people that have done it, mostly in bigger cities that I'm aware of, but I'm sure there's some small ones too. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a beginning of conversation, not an end of a conversation. What we all do with this within our own organizations, what DRF does with it, that's the real work. And so on behalf of the people of this region, Ted, I'd like to thank you.
Thank you.
Please be sure and get a copy of the executive summary as you leave, and the slides and the executive summary are available on the DRF website today. Thank you all for coming out.